Well, welcome to the Structural Modeling Project December 1st, 2018 video conference. Today, Kevin Dye will give us an overview of a series of ISM sessions that they did under the auspices of the UN last year. This is a report from I guess maybe the draft report, the preliminary report, and Kevin's going to talk with us about this particular event. So over to you, Kevin.
Okay, so as we've been alternating presentations between Joe and myself and others, we've gone from kind of the theoretical side of structural modeling, and then I typically am covering example applications. This is an interesting application in that it raises some very current theoretical questions that are interesting to the future development of structural modeling and software and platforms for doing it. This was a project of the United Nations Democracy Fund, and they had contracted the Future World Center in Nicosia, Cyprus, to engage younger people typically in their 20s on 5 different continents in doing structural modeling about democracy in the digital era in their regions and their countries. And there are two structures developed in each continent. One concerned what are the challenges or barriers or shortcomings to the practice of democracy in your region. And then the second type of structure was what can we do about it? And the interesting question that is raised is how can you combine all these results, or is it even appropriate to try to combine all these results into a summary or some conglomerate structure? So that's what this is about. Now we don't have a theory of how to do that. No one's written about how to combine multiple structures, as far as we know. It's been done. I've done it. I've never published about it in the peer-reviewed literature, and I don't recall reading. It might exist, but I don't recall reading about it in the peer-reviewed literature. So let's give you some examples of the structures. Jeff, can you read a page number?
Let me see.
In the mode you're on and go down to 80. Can you go down to page 80?
I think I can, yeah.
I thought it'd be best to start with something tangible with respect to the structural modeling, and that's the structures themselves.
Makes sense. We'll page through to here, kind of get a.
Well, so while you're doing that, I will describe the settings of how these structures were created in the groups. So there was a recruitment phase that went on for some months where they were inviting people to participate, and they had to submit their resume and I think an essay about why they wanted to participate, and they had to find 10 people that would be their shadows and would follow along the more high frequency participation of the core group. So for every event had a couple dozen participants in it, several facilitators, and each participant was networked with 10 people outside the event to tell them what they had talked about and to get their feedback. So that was the yeah, so we should be pretty close now. If you can just scroll page by page, you'll start seeing structures come up.
Okay.
So here are clusters anyway. Maybe it's farther than 80. Yeah, you can keep going, and then we'll go backwards after we see the structures. So, I mean, usually the final part of a structured dialogic design session, which is the name given to Christakis's practice, which he used to call Cognoscope, which was his commercial name for interactive management, which was more Warfield's language. But usually the culminating part of the structured dialogic design sessions is the creation of a structure. And then we look at the bottom of the structure and interpret what that may mean. If we're structuring challenges or shortcomings, it usually is considered a root cause of the problems. And if we're studying actions, the thing at the bottom is usually considered the action that has the most leverage on the system of other actions and challenges. And it used to be, depending on which software you have access to and the approach to your method, they would do a cross-impact analysis of the structure of actions on the structure of challenges. When Christakis went from Cognoscope 2 to Cognoscope 3, they lost, or even from 1 to 2, they lost the cross-impact analysis part of the software. They didn't implement it. So practitioners from then on have not been doing a cross-impact of these structures. So you can keep going until you hit these actual structures. Maybe it wasn't page 80 there, Joe.
I went through it, Kevin, and all the way to the end, and oh, here we go.
Page 106.
106.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. These are not in presentation mode. This is a report I just got a few days ago to review. So the right-hand side of the structure is on actually the next page, but you can see what's here. This is the European region. These structures are half a dozen levels deep. These color codings is actually a style of presentation of Cyprus. This is not something that Christakis did. Christakis typically color all the challenges red, all the actions blue. In Cyprus, they like to color things. Sometimes it's randomly, just to create each box is a different color. I don't know why they do that. Sometimes they use it to highlight which level things are on. In this case, it looks like they're highlighting the levels, which I think is redundant. But anyway, don't read too much into the different colors within the structures. But you see there's 20 or fewer items in these structures and about a half a dozen levels. And that's somewhat similar between the regions. I will note that there is much as just in terms of the word count, the total number of words spoken during a structured dialogue session was 100% difference between one region versus another. Like between, I'm trying to remember which ones it was, but maybe it was the Africans spoke 100% more than the South Americans. I can't quite remember. All the applicants to participate in this process were required to have high English proficiency, and so that biases the event towards about representation of their region. It's people that are also tend to be cosmopolitan, not just enveloped within their own culture. So we have these 5 things. these 5 structures as results. We also have clusters for each of the regions. You have clusters, there might be 10 or a dozen clusters of shortcomings of democracy for each region, and 10 or a dozen clusters of actions they propose for each region. So in developing the report for this, and the method by which we engage people, what could be done to sum it up? Do we just present it? This is the difference between the regions, or is there some overall thing that we could do? So maybe let's go, let's see, to page 14.
Page 14?
14. At least that's what it says in my PDF viewer. Yeah, that's what we want to look at. Can you can you zoom in on that a little bit?
Well, we'll sure try. We'll see what we can do here. Spread that out a little now. Okay.
Okay, so just scroll a little bit so we can center it in the window. Okay. Oh, that's good. So if you look at the bottom, there was 5. There were 5 techniques we employed to present them, to present the results of the 5 regions. In the bottom, you see a little icon representing the structures we just showed you. And there were some techniques we used to try to get insight about the composite of the regions. Just above that, there's several techniques that were used that didn't rely on the structural information. For example, when you do structured dialogic design, Cognoscope, interactive management, these different names for the similar process, people are generating a lot of words, and depending on how good the team is, they're capturing them. So some teams use a court stenographer and can give you a transcript of everything that was said in the session within minutes. They have it done. This typically costs about $75 an hour, and if you have someone on the phone, if you can get good sound into the room, you can do it. Anybody can do that. But then it's a question of taking advantage of what do you do with all that language. Now, a lot of what you see as publications for interpretive structural modeling omit over 95% of the words in the text that's generated during an event. And that's been going on for decades. The authors typically focus on the 6 to 10 words that are in the box in the structure. But there were hundreds of words spoken about the words in the box during the clarification and the dialogue. And one of the very kind of a funny thing about this practice, we call it structured dialogue, and almost in most all the publications, the dialogue is not captured It's not presented. There's no analysis done of it. All the focus is just on the words in each box and the single relationship identified between the boxes. That's, what's on the bottom layer, and what we're talking about is, other layers of meaning that you could derive from all the words generated. It was said, for example, that Buckminster Fuller, when he spoke at a rate of 5,000 words an hour. And so that's a benchmark to think of what's generated during a structured dialogue event. People don't speak continuously for 8 hours, but they're in the room for 8 hours. And if the facilitator's good, they're speaking less than the least speaking participant. So you're generating on the order of 30,000 to 35,000 words a day. And if it's a 3-day event where you're covering both challenges and actions, you're generating over 100,000 words spoken by the participants in the course of an event. Now, these events reach 5 days apiece. So for Middle East, I facilitated the dialogue in the Middle East. So we had people from Israel and 7 different Arab countries, including North Africa. And so over the course of 5 days, there's hundreds of, over 100,000 words being spoken. So one of the things you can do is just count. Yes?
Did this process use what the select the best 5 technique that's used in the Basecamp?
Used in what?
In the original IAM, interactive management process.
Yes.
After several people have spoken and you've gotten 100, 200, 300 ideas on the wall.
Yes.
The IAM process has each participant select 5.
Yes.
All right, and then test that for groupthink.
Yes.
So you typically come out with a much less number of ideas.
Yes.
Or the idea, the theory is that you surface the basic ideas and get rid of all that inability of humans to express themselves clearly.
Yes.
So your 100,000 words seems to me to reflect that everybody's speaking at once and nobody's listening to anybody. So a simple question is, do you filter, if in fact you captured all of that dialogue, is there a mechanism in what you're describing that selects the most important few out of all of those words?
We have people, yeah, in these events, the standard nominal group technique of selecting your 5, what you feel are the 5 most important ideas on the wall, and everybody does that, but the ideas are not dropped. Right. One reason, actually, we have a paper we've been working on for a few years about this, which is an analysis of the comparison of where items are on a structure compared to how many votes they had from that process of selecting 5. And it turns out there's no correlation. What we've looked at for the cases so far, there's no correlation of what is considered important from that selection process compared to what's determined to be a deep driver or root cause after the structuring. So it's felt that if you drop ideas after that initial voting, you may be losing the deep drivers. And what in practice, I can speak mostly from Christakis' style of practice. That voting, the selecting of the 5, was not used to make a decision on which ideas to concentrate on, except to say, usually, if when we had to pick how many things we were going to structure, we would usually say, if an idea has at least 2 votes on it, we'll structure it. And you had to calculate if you had time to do it. But usually, if an idea had, more than one person thought it was important, it was used as a justification, or there's a technical term for it, a quorum. If at least 2 people wanted to keep talking about it, it was kept in the thing. So the vote wasn't used to pick the things that had received the most votes. It was used to pick things that basically we would weed out anything only one person was interested in continuing in this structure. And so it didn't solve this problem of you have hundreds of thousands of words, and what can you do with them? Yeah.
That technique did away with Buckminster Fuller's participation. But we have a similar one in Warfield's method, because after the initial ISM structure is created, in every case we've used, people say, wait a minute, that's not right. It left out idea so-and-so. And so as a result.
Yeah, I think that there's a very interesting component to what Kevin's talking about with recording the words. And it reminded me of a technique where we got groups together for large-scale integration of technical projects, and they did this concept that was called knowledge storming. It wasn't brainstorming, it was knowledge storming. And what they did was they brought everybody together like in a brainstorming session, but they had video, they had audio recording, video recording, whiteboard rooms, everything in there was recorded. And then you bring the experts in, from different disassociated areas, and then those guys would learn from each other. And so if you're recording all this, if ISM is really a group learning process, it seems to me that the recording of the words and all this information would give you an opportunity to identify the learning. What did these people learn when they walked into the room? What did they know when they left the room that they didn't know when they came into the room, right?
Yeah,
and that would be very positive.
Yeah, and so we call that, by the way, Warfield talks about groupthink. We think there's another thing called non-think, which says the people really aren't listening to each other.
Yeah.
And I ran into that with great embarrassment in one session, because when we got to the structuring stage, the ISM stage, 50 people in a room, almost everything influenced everything else. And all of a sudden we got the very clear message that we had not conducted the guards on the wall technique sufficiently, that those 50 people in a room really hadn't heard what each other said. So how we overcome that is, I'm quite interested in, and I see that you're created a technique here that may work. Huh?
Kevin's screen appeared to freeze, and I think that he's gone off and is going to come back again.
We'll give him some time to see if he can connect back up. It's okay. It's a very interesting approach to adding the term frequency analysis in the conceptual maps.
Yeah.
And I think the conceptual maps and the frequency analysis have the technology to do that now that they really didn't have back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And
And John, in his questioning, used the adverb significantly affects. And of course, that's kind of fuzzy.
yeah.
I've been championing the use of Bayesian technique in that at that point. But are you aware of what? I'm not aware of what Christakis's group does for that.
They do interpretation quite a bit. They do a lot of. Let's see. I'm gonna. Their facilitation of the dialogue and the interpretation, I think, as you can tell here, is more on the words and a little bit less on the mathematical interpretation. So,
Okay.
the conceptual maps could straddle both sides, where the word frequency analysis really wouldn't do that very much. Because the most frequent words you're going to really throw out, right?
Okay. Well,
like articles and so forth.
I'm a little skeptical about, don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm a little skeptical about this data because in the beginning, the participants were not asked what democracy means.
Well,
and what democracy isn't.
Well, I'm not quite sure that they weren't asked that, but it's
He hasn't mentioned it yet.
He said they had to screen the people. They had to do, screening tests and everything.
Yeah.
They might have asked them during the screening process. So there's a number of that could happen. But it's
in the UN reports that I skimmed,
yep.
Not this material, but the UN report, they did not really differentiate between democracy of the Greek form and democracy of the UN form versus the representative republic of the United States form.
Right.
Except they're talking about structuring things, and democracy doesn't have a structure.
Well,
everybody's equal.
Yeah, it has some components. It has different components, and those components are then integrated in different ways.
Yeah. But you see, I just shared my claims. I'm not insisting that my version of democracy and what it is and what it isn't is correct. But I'm looking for the evidence here that all these kids or people from different countries had anywhere near a common definition of was heißt democracy.
Yeah, that would be interesting. They may not. It's when you look at their outcomes, they talk about governmental repression. I think there's some basic things like free press. You have to have freedom of the press really to have democracy, and a lot of things. But it's a good start.
Yeah. And then that begs the question of what is the press?
There you go.
Is that CNN?
Joseph, possible for you to send another link to Kevin in case?
I've done that. I'll do it again.
Oh, okay, cool.
Seems like he had
I think he pushed the wrong button because the group chat says Kevin Dye has left the group chat.
No,
So it happened to me. Mine all of a sudden went off, and I had to sign back in.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Well, now that I guess what we can do now that Kevin's not here is we can just kind of go through and take a look at this. All right, so
There we go.
read some of this. So basically, participation for all stakeholders. Okay, so they're kind of giving a governing of human activities concerned all living and non-living things on Earth. Okay, and beyond. Okay. It's make decisions that affect the lives of people. Okay, so they're kind of making an ethical statement here. Representing groups.
Yes, and unfortunately, ethics are not like standard of care. Ethics are not measurable.
Well, that's, yeah, well, you can have codes of ethics that you could try to institute them, but they're not very finely defined.
Finely defined, you see.
They're not well defined, yeah. Effective participation.
It's also important to note that this is a draft. They've not yet released the final.
Yeah.
So right to participate as a basic human right. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, here, freedom of speech. Okay.
And according to the United Nations, any of my neighbor's dogs can poop in my front lawn if they have a right to do that.
Well, there you go.
They talk that's the ethics. They don't talk about the responsibility for that liberty. Anyway,
There's always different parts. That's true. Okay. Well, here's an interesting one. We got system scientists here.
well, the one before it, access to information is a human right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Access to data is a human right. The information is generated by the human.
There is some processing that goes on there, isn't there?
And every right comes with a responsibility, and they don't state what the responsibility is.
Oh, there's
Nurses, you see,
we'll go through here and see what they do state. See what they do state. Open data, open technologies. You know, this is open data, open technologies. This is becoming a hot ethical topic even within the data science community. Very concerned about that. Yeah. Hello, Kevin.
Hey.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay, so we were just going through here and looking at these things in a little more detail. Pretty nice. I'll see if I can get back here to your chart where we interrupted you. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's some things you can do when you have a lot of words. There's text analysis techniques that have emerged over the past several decades, and there's a lot of software out for working with them. A lot of free software for doing things. One of the simplest ones is just to count word frequencies. It's the so-called word clouds. And, you know, it doesn't do that much for you except to say what things might be resonating with people. And in this case, you can see that even though everyone's speaking English, there's there's different preoccupation with certain words in different regions. And as we scroll down below, you'll see them. In this case, we put the word clouds in the form of the shape of the continent from which the participants were at. Not that one, but You can continue. Now, this is more of a fun thing. This is, we're working with young people that are very, very computer savvy, and for them to see digital imagery done from things they uttered. It's nice for a few seconds of fascination. And you can combine, this technique. Here's the first one. So this is shortcomings in the European region. So people complaining that there's not enough participation. There's a lot of politics across the EU. There's confusion about what is citizenry in the EU, or am I mostly a citizen of my country, or my ethnicity, or my language group, or this new thing that's emerged in the last half century, the European Union? It's not really a country. Is it my nationhood? We're confused. And so that was what came out. And to think in the analysis that we're doing here is how can these different tools be used to tell the story of other people's stories. So we're in the situation where we helped people from maybe 50 different countries answer a few simple questions. We helped them using structural modeling and clustering and voting, like Jack was just referring to. One of the simplest tools everyone's familiar with is voting. What do you think is the most important ideas? And then we're trying to tell the story. So these stories are going to be told in report form like this, but mostly they're going to be told when they're being told verbally, they're going to be told in a presentation style. And so what do you do if you want to talk about, what did they talk about in Europe? Well, it's nice to have a picture. And this is a simple way to create a picture. And I don't read too much into the analysis, except that it's what do people most frequently talk about. In Europe, they talked about systems and their sense of order, taking more advantage of online things. In contrast to Africa, they don't talk as much about doing things online. Why? Because they do things by phone. The internet is kind of more invisible in Africa. They have much more active business innovation going on with their phones than other continents. So
That's interesting.
Here's in the African context. I mean, while they have identity issues in Europe and in Africa, it's difficult to talk about democracy when people are killing each other. And so you'd expect the frequency of words to be different. Interestingly, one of the topics that came up a lot was the notion of process. They're in Africa. They're interested in the processes that lead to democracy. In Europe, they're kind of tired of process. So that they're especially tired of process in Belgium. I mean, in the heart of the European Union, that's what everybody complains about: process. In Africa, they're fascinated with it. How do we get the processes? So, a slide like this is going to be used for less than 30 seconds. And it's meant to, the thought is it can give someone an impression that you're talking to. Here, you've seen we've written a little paragraph that kind of sums up the words. So here we're taking, something like 40 or 50,000 words. We reduce it to a picture. We put it in the form of the continent it was from, so people don't have to, be asking where is this from, or doing it with additional text on the page. And And then for the people that are writing the reports or the people that were participants in the different continents writing about it to their local newspaper, they have something to respond to help them generate some new text that's interpreting the results of the dialogue.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Where on this example do you treat organized religion?
This particular page
Yeah,
in Latin America or Africa.
I don't see any word cloud that has to do with religion. And as I look at their whole pattern worldwide, I distinctly see the influences of various organized religions.
Mm-hmm.
South Central America and etc. versus Sweden. Yeah? And that explains the French, by the way. Their European Union is their 5th attempt in the last 3 centuries to run the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was just wondering whether or not you had sensed any. There's religion on your Australia chart.
Yeah.
Australia.
Australasia is in there, is one of the continents. Yeah. It's a good question about Asia. I wasn't involved in the ones in Latin America and Africa. I did the one in the Middle East, and I don't recall religion being a frequently mentioned thing there either. But
you're not allowed to.
Yeah, in the Middle East, it's too much of a hot button.
Yeah.
Even between the Arabs amongst themselves, forget about the Arabs and Israelis. The different Muslim religions are just as much ready to kill each other as the Arabs versus Israelis, and it's just something you don't talk about. So, in that case, I could see. I don't know. I don't recall if religion is in there in the Middle East, but I wasn't a facilitator in the other continents, and I'm not as embedded in the text. But certainly South America. That would be a way I would, if I was presenting stuff about South America, to say, hey, the Jesuits were so involved in democracy in Latin America. It's kind of strange that according to the youth in 10 countries in South America, it's not mentioned. Why is that? And that's the way I would talk about it. Why isn't it mentioned? You'd think it would be. It's so central to the emergence of democracy in Latin America over 40, 50 years last, right? That's what you mean.
I noticed that religion was shown on the MENA map.
Was it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this one's MENA actions. This would be MENA shortcomings. We have the issues of women. Whoops, go back, Joe. Here I am trying to finger scroll. Yeah, there we are.
There it is. Right there.
Oh yeah, religion on the right.
Yep.
Smaller than the issue of women's rights. And that's actually something the UN, it comes out in a number of the UN studies that a lot of things would improve in all over the world, but also the Middle East, if you improve women's lives. It can have a lot bigger effect on the economy than dealing with the dispute between religions.
Yep.
That's a good question, Jack. I mean, that's the type of thing that's meant to prompt this type of a display and to provoke inquiry about the results of the dialogue.
Okay.
That's something.
And then regardless of my views, is there any plan by the UN to have a second phase with these participants after they've seen each other's work?
No.
Unless the UN funds that learning cycle, this is futile.
Yeah, I don't think there's a follow-up beyond. I mean, this is a what's called a manifesto, which is a summary of a broader publication of all the different things that were done previously. There was a report done for each continent before this was done, and I think there's a bigger summary report. At least that's what I was working on. And then this is a condensed version they're calling a manifesto. And I think that all the country report, not the country, the region reports were sent to all of the practitioners, but I don't think there was anything organized about combining them. Yeah.
No measure of it learning how much learning has occurred yet.
You mean a cross-fertilization between the regions?
Yes, of the exactly the exact participants.
Yeah.
How have their views changed as a result of reading the other reports, of actually reading the other reports?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a weakness. And it was difficult to engage them even reading about their own work after they were done. After their work was done with the structural modeling in our events, they were supposed to go back to each participant had 10 what were called shadow participants.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to take the results to the local newspapers, have community meetings, things like that. And but it wasn't funded. They were not paid to do it.
Yeah.
And it had very little participation rates. They were kind of almost all of them just on to the next thing in their lives. And yeah, so that was a design, and that was, part of that was the UN didn't require that aspect of the project. That was a hope of the Future World Center, and the Future Worlds also had hoped there would be an international online dialogue after all the regions were done to do that. But we found it difficult to just get basics, like, and for example, we had everyone's clarification of their ideas put into the report. Okay, so we had maybe 100 to 200 clarifications written down. And sometimes people although they were good at English, they were slow at writing it or something like that. And we would find when we go to do the report, we're missing 25 clarifications. And all these people are back in their own country, and we have their email address. And we said, could you please write the clarification of the statement? We send them the statement, and it takes 6 weeks to get back 25 words,
Yeah.
And so, and that was typical. That was not atypical. And so the I don't know if it was a way that people were invited. They were very, excited about involving all of their shadow participants in their local communities and bringing the results of this international work back in. When it came to even getting 25 words on what did you mean by this statement, it was like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
We can just scroll through to other techniques or some other interesting things here before we run out of time, Joe.
Okay.
This keeps scrolling. This is a new set of things right here. Just stop there. You see a heat map, right? Yeah, just above this is a heat map. Okay, so this is another. This is prior or without taking advantage of structural information. That is done by ISM, but it is a type of structural information embedded in open text. And this is based on a combination of text analysis techniques, but the most basic technique is simple co-occurrence of terms. The word term is a little different than word. A term in text analysis has more meaning than a word because of its association with other words. And so this is a heat map view of word co-occurrence frequencies. So the first one we were looking at was word frequencies, and just which words are more frequent or bigger. In this one, the co-occurring terms are red, they're hotter. And then a different view of that is you see a piece of it to the right there, but it's actually on the next page. And this is not one of the better ones, but you see down here on the lower left of your page, it's a network analysis of the word co-occurrence. And even though we have typically over 100,000 words per dialogue session to use, it's actually on the small side for using many text analysis tools. They like millions of words. They're like a whole corpus of a book. But there was enough that it can give you something interesting to respond to. It's easier to look at this and see if it resonates with some theme or generates some inquiry in your mind. It's easier than reading 100,000 clarifications that are not structured at all. So you can keep going. So there's a pair of these challenges and actions for each region, and that's just this one's the network version of the heat maps.
Have they done any on anti-occurrence, like liberty and female?
We didn't do such a thing. Do you mean see which things are not appearing together?
Yes.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. No, the answer is no. We haven't done it. I'm not sure if there's a way to use this software to do that, or
Probably
if there's
not,
other
but-
software. Not sure, but that would be a good way to do an analysis.
But one of the basic tenets of systems is identifying not only the co-occurrence, but the anti-occurrence.
Yeah,
And unless you know what something isn't, you don't know anything.
yeah. You can just stop here a second, Joe.
Sure.
Having scrolled through several of these, you'll see without getting into the specific words, just how rich the networks in the Middle East are compared to the other ones we passed. And that's a couple reasons. One of the reasons, I was the facilitator on this event, and I'm very strict about working the participants, Max. So there is simply more words here than the other regions, and just by having more words, there's going to be more opportunity for co-occurrence of terms, so you get a richer looking network. But go ahead, you can keep going. And
Very interesting.
A richer network, but was your span of temperatures roughly the same?
in the heat map with the span,
With in your Central America, in the one you facilitated.
the span of temperatures as compared between regions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, and I don't know how that software. I don't know how.
Well,
I think there is how to calibrate, what the color scales are.
yes,
Yeah, I don't know how
they
to do
had to
that.
do that in order to assign a color. Because each one of these is simply a mixture of RGB.
Yeah, I wouldn't ascribe any meaning to the colors across the regions. We did not calibrate between regions.
Well, we've got about 4 minutes left.
Right. So I can quickly summarize this next technique. So after you do, the typical idea generation, you clarify your ideas, you vote, you pick your top 5 votes. Then we typically looking at clusters. Sometimes the voting's done after the clusters, but we're organizing 100 or 200 items into usually around a dozen. We don't prescribe how many, but it's usually 8 to a dozen clusters. And here we're actually using structural information from the ISM. We're assigning the influence score to each idea into a cluster and adding that all up, as well as the votes. When you pick your top 5 ideas during the nominal group technique. And so we're doing a combined influence and voting score to see which clusters seem to have the greatest influence as interpreted from the structural model. That comes as a later step, as well as the most important votings. And that's a way of kind of surfacing a major theme. And we combined all the regions here. So we have capacity building and awareness seem to have as developed in Africa, seem to be one of the most driving and important themes. If you are to interpret the name that we assign to the participants assigned to the clusters as a theme. You can keep going, Joe. And I think that should be about it.
All right. This is very interesting. So I think the report, I'll put it up on a Google Drive, and then the people here that were on the video, I'll send you a link to it so you can have access to it. Then we have December 15th is open for a presentation. Mary and I are going to do January 5th. Is anyone interested in doing December 15th? All right. Well, I'll leave that question open for a while. If no one has anything they want to talk about on the 15th, then we'll go ahead and cancel the 15th and just plan on January the 5th. But we'll see how that goes. So with that, is there any other comments, questions that people would like to ask before we conclude today's session?
I'd like a little observation here on education system. A couple of years ago, associates of mine took on a project in Africa to teach people how to teach. And they agreed to 25 participants. When they got there, 210 women had showed up. And so they had to adapt to help 210 women. Interestingly, there were no men. And as they went around to understand why, it turns out that education in Africa, in that area at least, is about reading, writing, and arithmetic. They expect the young children to learn citizenship from their male counterparts. And we find much of that in the United States, but on an interesting note, under grade 12, there is practically no real education about citizenship. 40 years ago, it was the leading purpose, but today it's in fact frowned on. Social studies teachers who engage in equal among alternatives are frowned upon. So anyway, I've taken too much time to begin with, but that's a experience that astounded us.
It's interesting, Jack. I think that one of the problems we're having now is what you're talking about is very, very difficult to measure. And so the emphasis on testing the effectiveness of teaching will kind of make these things that are more difficult to measure less popular. The things that have really clear answers like mathematics, reading and interpreting, structuring sentences and so forth, those are things that are probably, it's a higher value.
Yeah.
I think as a contextual response, Jack, we as facilitators and in many practices like Christakis and Warfield advocated, the facilitator is not involved in the content.
Right.
And what we were presenting here is, can we come up with objective techniques, software analysis tools, things that can do a summing up of content so the facilitator stays in this neutral position. Yeah. But when it comes to actually writing about the results, everyone asks the facilitator. In many cases, what does it mean? They ask the facilitator. And we're not the content masters. We're not experts in education, and it happens that Future Worlds is, but we're not experts in inter-religious conflict, for example.
What we have done, because Warfield insisted on it, is that you have a facilitator, and then as the data starts coming in, you have a topical expert,
right,
that helps structure the data. And for example, Dr. Casey from General Motors was one of John's.
This might be a couple of interesting topics that we can continue on the 15th if anybody wants to continue discussing these, but
right.
I'd like to keep these pretty close to an hour, and we're kind of use our time this time.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll, again, extend this discussion of this particular report to the 15th if you're willing to do that, Kevin.
Yeah, I'd like to engage Jack in this discussion. I mean, it's a perfect discussion.
Yeah, Kevin's got some wonderful information here. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
And thanks everyone for participating, and look forward to talking with you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks.